It was on Bute Street in Cardiff, now a short walk from the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, that Shirley Veronica Bassey, the daughter of a Nigerian father and an English mother, spent her early childhood. Bassey was blessed with a gift for singing. Over 140 million recordings of her songs had been sold worldwide. But her childhood was marred by poverty.
Being coloured was never my problem, never has been. In Cardiff, our problem was more basic, a 4-letter word: food.
In 1997, the Welsh electorate voted for a devolution of powers from central government to Wales. The first Welsh Assembly came into being in 1999. Bassey performed at the Welsh Assembly concert. She was introduced as the most famous Welsh woman in the world. She's also one of the most loved. Bassey was brought up in a multi-ethnic environment. Charlotte Williams OBE was not. The A470 is a road that links Cardiff on the south coast of Wales with Llandudno on the north coast. Llandudno is a seaside resort famed for its pier that lies between the headlands either end of Llandudno Bay. The headland protruding northwestward from the town is known as the Great Orme and is home to herds of wild Kashmiri goats whose ancestors once roamed the mountains of northern India. They descended from a pair presented by the Shah of Persia to Queen Victoria, who in turn gifted them to Lord Mostyn. The Mostyn family were largely responsible for the development of the town. They owned large tracts of the land and during the 19th century leased plots for development. Charlotte Williams is a university academic who grew up in Llandudno. She is the daughter of a Ghanaian father and a Welsh mother. Like many young people, she struggled with her identity when growing up. The struggle being more intense in her case because she was a black girl living among a people, almost all of whom were white. She writes,
I grew up in the 1960s in Llandudno in North Wales, a small seaside town that everyone from the northwest has either been to or will come to for a day out, at least once. A pastel arc of holiday hotels hugs the shoreline in the bay between two slumbering headlands. A town that once attracted the Victorian and Edwardian moneyed classes and later in droves factory workers from the northern towns with their newfound leisure time, stepping off the steamers onto the longest pier in Wales. The town offered them, among many pleasures, N-word minstrels and other curiosities in en-plein-air concerts in Happy Valley and in its various indoor theatre halls. This is a town that has ultimately morphed into the perfect retirement spot, a promenade full of whiteheads sitting on the death benches that memorialize those who came before them. It's a place where the seagulls and the thrum of the waves sing a fanciful reprieve before the serious mountains that rise up into wild Wales. Not exactly the welcome in the hillside Wales, nor the poverty-stricken scar of industrial Wales, not the Welsh-speaking Wales that Owain Glyndŵr fought for, not even the place with the distinctive accent of the bustling southern urban centres. Rather, my hometown is that crystallized epitome of the Victorian seaside town, with its seasonal tide of visitors washing in and out, confuddling any sense of an identifiable culture. A place that at one time had seemed to me, well, pointless.
In her autobiography, Sugar and Slate, Williams writes of her childhood.
Are you from Africa? I bet it's hot in your country. Are you feeling the cold? Do you eat this sort of food where you come from? Are you that colour all over? Can you speak English? You people are so good at dancing. Is that your father? He's a proper gentleman, isn't he? What part of Africa is he from? Can't tell when you're dirty, can we? You don't need to wash so often, I suppose. That's some suntan you got there. Have they all got small ears like you? Let me feel your hair. People like you don't blush, do they? I mean, there's no point.
You mean I spent all those years with my cheeks burning and nobody knew any different? We had no name for that kind of stuff. The word racism hadn't been invented. I accepted it as my personal battle, not as anything particularly collective. We were all busy suppressing the reality of it, both them and us. Take the words
Blackie, darkie, rubber lips, gollywog, wog, nigger, coon.
shocking and upsetting as these words were, they rarely came our way. And we learned fairly early on to cope with those kinds of names. Kids drunk saw some disgruntled old person might occasionally let the side down, but in our town we all colluded in the wonderful deceit of what I suppose you could call polite racism. Small town thinking has its own way of managing difference. It both embraces it and rejects it. In its ambivalence, you become at one and at the same time highly invisible and punishingly visible,
We never really noticed you were coloured.
they would say in condescending tones. Or,
You're not really black, you're just brown.
and we would all be relieved of the onerous impoliteness of being black. We would trade bits of ourselves for their white acceptance, denying ourselves to provide reassurance against the intrusion of difference. But it was the background assumptions embodied in the questions that caught me so unawares. The everyday assumptions of inferiority that eventually ground me down until I didn't know who or what I was.
William's childhood experiences have evidently had a profound impact.
Unlike me, today every child in Wales has the opportunity to understand that Black history is Welsh history, and Welsh history is Black history, as our First Minister has said. They have the opportunity to understand Wales's connections with slavery and empire, its colonial entrepreneurs, and the ventures of its missionaries that followed in their tracks, its migrations out and its migrations in.
Williams is advising the Welsh Government on how to decolonise the school curriculum. Slavery was the norm in Africa for centuries before the European powers arrived. The impact of the Atlantic slave trade was to massively increase the demand. What is sacred in Christianity is truth. For postmodern philosophers, truth is not sacred. And one of those postmodern philosophers is Michel Foucault, one of the most cited scholars in the world, whose work is largely inspired by anti-Christian philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche.
In the essay, Nietzsche argued that academics had poisoned our sense of how history should be read and taught. They made it seem as if one should read history in some sort of a disinterested way in order to learn how it all was in the past. But Nietzsche rejected this with sarcastic fury. There was no point learning about the past for its own sake. The only reason to read and study history is to dig out from the past ideas, concepts and examples which can help us to lead a better life in our own times. This essay liberated Foucault intellectually, as nothing had till then. Immediately, he changed the direction of his work and decided to become a particular kind of philosophical historian, someone who could look back into the past to help to sort out the urgent issues of his own time.
Holy Trinity, a large Victorian church, was built to cater for the increasing number of visitors to the town. The church was completed in 1872. It is lavishly decorated. The Trinity is the core of the traditional Christian faith. And within the Trinity, Jesus Christ represents the divine or universal reason. Along with Judaism and Islam, Christianity is one of the three Abrahamic faiths, but unlike the other two, religious law is not sacred. As St. Paul writes,
"Now before faith came, we were imprisoned and guarded under the law until faith would be revealed. Therefore the law was our disciplinarian until Christ came, so that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer subject to a disciplinarian. For in Christ Jesus you are all children of God through faith. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise."
what is sacred in Christianity is truth, free speech, and individual liberty. Although, of course, Britain benefited from the Atlantic slave trade. During the 18th and 19th century, there was an influential movement of Christian abolitionists within Britain who started a movement that changed the world. Thomas Clarkson was the eldest son of an Anglican priest who studied at Cambridge University. In 1785, he entered a Latin essay competition set by the university vice-chancellor. The title of the essay was
An liceat invitos in servitutem dare.
Is it lawful to make slaves of others against their will? Clarkson did his research, wrote his essay, and won the competition. He later wrote,
"As it is usual to read these essays publicly in the Senate House, soon after the prize is adjudged, I was called to Cambridge for this purpose. I went and performed my office. On returning, however, to London, the subject of it almost wholly engrossed my thoughts. I became at times very seriously affected while upon the road. I stopped my horse occasionally and dismounted and walked. I frequently tried to persuade myself in these intervals that the contents of my essay could not be true. The more, however, I reflected upon them, or rather upon the authorities on which they were founded, the more I gave them credit. Coming in sight of Wade's Mill in Hertfordshire, I sat down, disconsolate, on the turf by the roadside, and held my horse. Here a thought came into my mind, that if the contents of the essay were true, it was time some person should see these calamities to their end. Agitated in this manner, I reached home. This was in the summer of 1785.
This experience and sense of calling ultimately led Clarkson to devote his life to work to abolish the slave trade. What is sacred in Christianity is truth. What is sacred in Islam is not truth. It is Muhammad and his teachings incorporated into the Quran. In 1804, 3 years prior to the Act of Parliament that banned the slave trade in the British Empire, the Sokoto Caliphate was founded. The founder, Usman and Fodio, criticized African Muslim elites for violating Sharia law. Sharia law stipulates that slavery of war captives is permissible if the captive is not a Muslim. Sharia law also stipulates the master has the right to sexual access to a female captive, but only if she is not married. Usman began an Islamic religious and social revolution and waged a holy war, a jihad, on what he saw as the corrupted existing Muslim kingdoms.
The Sokoto Caliphate was the largest independent state in Africa in the 19th century and had an enslaved population of several million people at the time of the colonial conquest, which was 1897 to 1903. As is argued here, the Caliphate consciously pursued a policy of enslavement as a means of consolidating political control, economic development, religious conversion, and social planning. Although the process of enslavement entailed risks to the enslavers and untold hardship and suffering for targeted populations, religious and political ideology justified this form of enforced migration through the call for jihad against unbelievers. The fact that implementation resulted in considerable loss of life and the destruction of property was an inefficiency that may have been troubling to some, but was tolerated in the interests of the Muslim community.
Bruce Gilley is a professor of political science and author of a book, The Case for Colonialism. He argues that colonial powers established institutions in colonized countries, including an independent judiciary, an education system, and accountable government. Where these institutions survive, the independent country thrives. Where these institutions fail, the country fails. In Nigeria and many other former colonies, the countries are failing. It is great temptation to blame these failures on colonialism. Cindy Ikie is a postgraduate student at Cardiff University School of Biosciences. She's also National Campaign Manager for Black Lives Matter Cymru. In a podcast, she talks about her understanding of colonialism.
We cannot afford to be apolitical. Let us take what should be a simple example. Depending on the day you ask me and the mood I'm in all, I'm an African with Nigerian heritage, and I'm a British citizen also. So much of my identity is steeped in politics. Outside of politics, I would rather describe myself as though I was a painting. A canvas that originates in Africa, painted on with strokes from Nigeria, and broadly the British Empire. Yes, the British Empire. Blackness in the sense of the word that most of us would be familiar with is entirely born out of the British Empire having enslaved African people. And no, not every single African was enslaved. But that process of inhumane treatment and enslavement of people affected every African, even till today. Black lives have been highly politicised through time and in a really negative way. It is clear that we need to be able to talk about our politics in black communities and do so in a loving and respectful way. Just the other day I was scrolling through Twitter beneath all the doom and gloom you usually find on there and the occasional chuckle-worthy tweet. I saw someone ask about a Wales-specific need to mobilise the black vote. Well, you should be pleased to know that two organisations that speak to the people of African descent in Wales, namely FoRB Africa and the Sub-Saharan Advisory Panel, are in partnership on a campaign, #YourVoice2021. So we do have groups in Wales that care enough to support young black people exercising their right to vote.
FoRB Africa provides an anti-racism and Black Lives Matter reading list that includes an article by Caitlin Duffy.
So you want to be a white ally, healing from white supremacy. White people aren't inherently bad or broken. We are humans, born into and conditioned by a toxic culture of whiteness. I am a person underneath my ancestors' assimilation and my social inheritance of this culture in the United States, including the biases it seeds in me, the privileges it affords me, the realities it numbs me from, and the history and lineages it obscures. Combined with ongoing education and reparations, I believe that one of the most powerful things that people of European descent like me can do is to reckon with how white supremacy has dehumanized us and our families in these ways, and identify our own stake in racial justice. Questions that have guided me in this include: what can healing look and feel like for white people so that we can show up in multiracial workplaces and social movements in more effective, grounded ways? How can we recognize and treat white fragility as a trauma response to generations of isolating individualism and disconnection from our shared humanity? What is our North Star for a different way of being, not just doing, and not just as white people, but as humans?
Within Christianity is truth and reason that are sacred. But it's not the same within our university system. Dr. Robin Smith talks about whiteness as a cultural institution.
EDI for me is that by attending to perhaps the different needs and different experiences of the people in the classroom, you're actually producing a more inclusive classroom that just makes for a better educational experience for everybody, including the teacher. And in the School of Social Sciences, it's something that we should be taking seriously anyway as part of our own thinking about how society is organised and how unequal organisations of society have different outcomes for different people and groups and communities and so on. At the same time, I think when I use the word community there, we do have to think carefully about this notion of diversity and inclusion alongside that. What is the nature of the centre that we're asking people to kind of participate in? And even when I just use the word we then, so what is that we that people are being included into, and how does diversity and inclusion relate as a sort of way of questioning some of the principles that we take for granted in terms of the kind of norms and values and culture of the institution. Recently, I've been taking forward some of these ideas and particularly using Paul Gilroy's notions of conviviality over community, whereas conviviality can be taken as a kind of practical approach, an interactional approach to overcoming what some people talk about as kind of insurmountable differences in culture, language, race, religion, whatever else it is, but actually approaching those as potentially unremarkable and potentially marginalized through this notion of this kind of practical inclusion that I was talking about previously. And taking this forward and linking to some of the comments I just made, recently I've been talking with colleagues about having a kind of rolling project where we actually are questioning whiteness itself and whiteness as an institution.
A society's values do not originate in skin colour, they originate in the historically dominant religion. In Wales, that religion is Christianity. In April 2024, an article was printed in the British Educational Research Journal. The article was titled Reimagining a Decolonised Anti-Racist Curriculum Within Initial Teacher Education in a Welsh University. The lead author was Susan Davies from Cardiff Metropolitan University. The article states,
changes to the Welsh curriculum are becoming apparent. The Williams report culminated in recommendations for schools and initial teacher education on the inclusion and teaching of Black, Asian and minority ethnic histories in Wales. The subsequent Welsh Government ITE action plan was designed to ensure the proactive recruitment of trainee teachers from Black and racially minoritized backgrounds in Wales. As a result of this legislation, a team of ITE lecturers in a school of education in a Welsh university formed a research triad and larger research collective, the idea being that we needed to decolonize our own pedagogy and curriculum delivery and reimagine ITE within an anti-racist paradigm.
In May 2024, the Campaign for Science and Engineering hosted a lecture by Wendy Larner. In the lecture, Larner said,
I began to understand the sustained pattern of English and Scottish ownership of key Welsh assets and the wider links to empire. In particular, Charlotte Williams's book Sugar and Slate helped me understand that money from the slave trade had helped pay for industrial development in Wales.
Meanwhile, in northern Nigeria these days, there is something of a social breakdown.
Once again, the soil at Benue has been soaked with the blood of innocent Nigerians. Over 200 lives were lost in yet another senseless massacre, this time in a border town between Benue and Nasarawa states. This is not merely a tragic headline, it is a damning indictment on a government that has repeatedly failed in its primary duty, the protection of its people. For over a decade, the Nigerian state has exhibited a shocking inability or unwillingness to dismantle the terror networks wreaking havoc across the north, central, and beyond. Killer herdsmen, bandits, and insurgents have transformed rural communities into slaughterhouses. Farmlands have become graveyards, homes have become war zones. The carnage continues, unrelenting. Despite countless promises, strategy sessions, and security summits, the body count keeps rising. The Nigerian government has shown neither the will to name and shame the perpetrators, nor the decisiveness to pursue and prosecute them. Instead, we are fed empty rhetoric and hollow condolences. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria, a moral authority in the nation, has issued at least 6 communiques since 2016, warning of the worsening crisis. They are no longer merely urging action, they are demanding it. So too is the international community, as Pope Leo XIV recently condemned the killings, describing them as a terrible massacre and calling for urgent prayers for justice and peace. But prayers alone are not enough. Nigerians are not just grieving, they are watching, they are waiting, and they are weary of a state that promises protection yet delivers peril. It is telling that security officials have only now promised to change tactics in the face of this ongoing bloodbath. This move, while welcome, is tragically late. Thousands are already dead. Whole communities have been displaced. Trust in government is evaporating. Let us be clear, no country worthy of the name can tolerate what is happening in Benue.
Matthew Jones from Merthyr Tydfil is Chief Operations Officer for the FoRB Foundation, an organisation dedicated to campaigning for freedom of religious belief. The FoRB Foundation have been attempting to highlight the plight of Christians in Nigeria.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. About 6 months ago, we had the opportunity to meet with people in the UK, and we shared with them the situation that was happening here, and they understand and feel your pain. So I want you to know that there are people many miles from here that love you, and we are sorry to hear about the things that you are experiencing. And some people who were with us in the FoRB Foundation felt so strongly that they helped us to prepare these things here today for you, because they felt a love for their sisters and wanted to do something to help. The FoRB Foundation is about helping people that are struggling because they have been persecuted or because they are experiencing challenges because of their faith. We want to try and help, and we want you to know that we are thinking of you. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and we hope that it helps in just a small way.
The work gets no prominence in Wales. It does not fit the accepted narrative. As is stated within the article Reimagining a Decolonised Anti-Racist Curriculum within Initial Teacher Education in a Welsh University.
As Sangera declares, within the United Kingdom, empire explains our particular brand of racism.